Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. I'm Jim Rhodes with the Octane Group in Salt Lake City. Today we are talking the top three truths about buy here, pay here collections, and specifically the approach that you use to collections and buy here, pay here, and the culture that you create in the process of doing that. Just for those of you tuning in and may not be familiar with my background, I'm 22 years in buy here, pay here, 20 years of that specifically in consulting for buy here, pay here, and subprime auto finance consulting companies or finance companies rather. And I have now been in 26 states professionally. So, the things that I speak about, the things that we're going to talk about today are not anything you're going to be able to verify in terms of any kind of data. Nobody's got data on the things we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to share with you what my actual observations have been across 22 years of experience. And that includes 7 years of owning my own dealership and finance company back in Oklahoma. So again, when we talk about culture, in my experience, there's exactly two ways or two camps when it comes to collecting and buy here, pay here. First, let's understand that we're collecting from a poor credit customer who has not been very successful with managing money and not been successful with credit in the past. And so, how we approach that customer is going to have a lot to do with how successful we are. So, in my estimation, again, there are two approaches. One is what I call an iron fist approach. It's a very demanding approach. You get your payment in by 6 o'clock on Friday or else. And so, that again is what I would call the iron fist approach. Now, the other approach is a more inclusive, sort of friendly, flexible approach. And while we still place some demands in that approach, it's a much different attitude, not as much pressure. Again, flexibility. There are some things that we do hold the customer accountable to, but I would just call that, a softer, gentler approach, if you want to think of it that way. And obviously, you'll hear by the end of the session here that that is certainly the approach that I recommend for a variety of reasons. So one of the truths about buy here, pay here collections is we know if we take that iron fist approach, that leads to very poor employee morale. Now, we can hire collectors and we can hire managers of collections department and we can ask them to take a really hard stance with customers, demand that they get that payment in. If not, we're going to repossess the car. And guess what? We can have some success. Near term, we can get some payments in and we can probably even keep delinquency in check. But my experience has been that employees do not like working in that sort of environment. That's a frustrating, sort of hostile environment. And I'm not surprised to visit a dealership with that sort of approach. It's got a very high turnover in the collections department. Let's face it, collections and buy here, pay here is a difficult job. And we need to create an environment that is more favorable to allow us to keep good employees who do a good job in collections. And we need to create that approach that is sustainable and allows for employees to hang in that line of work. So again, environment and culture, these are things you're not going to find data on. These are things that I can just tell you from experience of being in the trenches of some very large buy here, pay here operations. I've been across those 26 states. I've been in some very big finance companies, running thousands of accounts, $50+ million in receivables. So you're talking about a large staff of collectors. I think some of the biggest companies I've been in have a dozen to 15 collectors on staff, and so that's a pretty big collection department, and that is a lot of payments coming in, a lot of interaction with customers. And what I'm telling you is from experience, when we take that iron fist approach and we place hard demands on customers, then we can expect that employee morale is going to be low. There's going to be a lot of frustration because we place those demands on customers and they often cannot follow through. That's just a reality of our business. So we're just creating a culture with very low employee morale and very high employee turnover. So we should avoid that, obviously. One of the other truths is that heavy pressure leads to unhappy and stressed customers. So our entire portfolio, I talked about that portfolio that had 12 to 15 collectors, more than 5,000 contracts. And I can just tell you across the dialogue that we experience in that situation is that the customers are very frustrated. Let's back up and take a minute and think about who this customer is. We're financing a customer again who's got poor credit. They're typically on the lower income spectrum, and they're struggling. They're feeling a lot of pressure already. They're already in that paycheck to paycheck environment. They have kids and stresses and bills coming due, and they've got a lot of stresses in their own life. And so when we apply this as one more additional pressure, we shouldn't be surprised if the customer is not successful. And I would argue that the longer the note is that we're expecting that customer to perform on, then the greater the chance of failure. So again, I've been in dealerships that have very long contracts, in a buy here, pay here situation. So the longer that contract is, and the more pressure we're applying, why should we be surprised if that customer is not successful in the long run? So obviously, what we have to do is create an environment and create an approach that allows that customer to be successful. There's some real key things that we teach on the collection side in terms of how to achieve that, how to allow um, collectors to be rewarded for doing the job that's expected, and still have success in getting that customer to make those payments, and have more customers reach maturity, pay off the car and buy another car. That's obviously what we ultimately want for all of our clients. And so that's the approach that you're going to always hear me recommend. We also know that placing harsh demands on customers is going to lead to more repos. You heard me say earlier that if we're having success in terms of if we're applying a lot of pressure, we can sometimes have success in getting payments in. And so, come Friday, our delinquency list may be fairly short because we applied a lot of pressure to the customers and patting ourselves on the back because we got those payments in. But the reality is, often all we're doing is creating a situation where the customer's not going to be successful in the long term. They're Because we applied pressure to them, they paid us perhaps instead of paying their rent. So they just end up feeling pressure somewhere else. And so, in a couple of weeks, they're having to deal with their rent or they're getting evicted, worst case. And now, guess what? We've got an unhappy customer. We've got a situation that's pretty difficult for a collector to navigate. And so we've just created that situation ourselves. So it's like we apply pressure, and we might get a payment this week, but in the long run, we're going to create a lot more repos. And I would argue that that's not where you want to be. And frankly, if you're among those dealers, because we hear about them, we hear about dealers that are applying pressure to customers, and they almost hope the customer gets repossessed, and so that's not an approach I recommend. That's not a client that I frankly want to do business with. I can't really help in that situation, frankly. If you're taking that approach, then I'm probably not the consulting firm for you anyway. So we're going to teach being flexible with customers, working with them, and we do that because we know that creates a better environment for your employees. You're going to keep employees longer. Customers are ultimately going to be more successful. You're going to have a better portfolio performance over time, and you're going to have a lot fewer repos and repo losses. So obviously that's what we condone. It's why we recommend that approach. So if you appreciate this information, if you could use some help in collections, by all means reach out to us. Contact information is shown there on the bottom of the screen. I would urge you also to follow our channel on YouTube. We're going to start publishing more and more content there, much like what you see here, and you'll be able to keep up with us. Certainly on LinkedIn, you can find the Octane Group of Utah on LinkedIn. Follow us on Facebook for more of the same. So by all means, keep in touch with us, stay connected, and we'll continue to share content on the buy here, pay here industry. Thanks for tuning in.